Well, good morning, everyone. It's great that we can all be here together. This is our final send-off for this project this year. And just as a quick review, this is sort of the last phase of the project that we've been involved in this year. It's for MISA, which stands for Managing Information and Student Achievement. And that grant came our way so that we could get together and learn a little bit more about mathematics this year. So this roundtable discussion was part of the commitment that we made to the ministry about collecting your feedback at the end of the project to see if it has met some of our particular goals. And so with that's going to form the framework for our conversation this morning. Before we get started, why don't we just go around the table for documentation's sake and introduce ourselves and the role that we had within that project. Do you want to start, Gintis?
I'm Gintis Turilis and teach grade 6 mathematics.
I'm Leslie Emond and I'm the resource teacher for this school.
I'm Valerie Lyon and I'm the school success teacher.
I'm Wendy Chambers and I teach grade 6 core and I'm the teacher librarian.
I'm Gino DiTomaso. I teach an integrated curriculum for grade 7 and had an opportunity to host a class to run one of our co-planned lessons.
And I'm David Jack. I'm the school effectiveness lead that submitted the grant proposal in the first place. Just for posterity, we have 3 teachers who were part of the project through the year who aren't available to join us today, as is Jim Brooks, who's the principal at Hillside. He may pop in later. He certainly was at the table periodically when he could, but certainly was very interested in the outcome of today's conversation. So with that as our starting point, we'll start generally. We want to investigate a couple of things. One would be the framework for this kind of learning, which is called the collaborative inquiry model. We started with a particular challenge in practice at the grade 6 level as it pertained to mathematics, and then we followed a particular format where you go into particular classrooms, and it's co-planning, co-teaching, co-debriefing. So first off, your thoughts about that particular framework, and while it's true, it can't be replicated all the time, but in terms of learning about addressing that particular challenge of practice, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that framework. So it's just a roundtable discussion. Talk as you wish.
I thought the framework itself was really neat to be able to plan together, implement the lesson, and come back and debrief. Mm-hmm. What I would like to have seen is a bit more time for the actual planning of the lesson, so that the teachers that were doing the lesson didn't feel so under the gun. But the actual working together, planning the lesson, talking about the pros and cons of the lesson afterwards was excellent, and getting the feedback from the various teachers that were watching it.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I also thought that the chance to have so many other teachers in the classroom to be observing what the students are talking about, what strengths, what gaps they have, that was great, because when you're teaching the lesson on your own, you don't have that opportunity. So getting that feedback and then being able to bring that back to the table and use that knowledge and information for planning the next part of the lesson, consolidation, was great.
Anybody else?
One of the things that I liked about it was in the planning stage, where we had a lot of time to talk about what exactly was going to be done and how that was refined and became more specific as we targeted the specific needs of the students, and as that was shared in terms of where the students are at and what we were trying to accomplish, and learning goals were really tweaked and narrowed, so that it became something that was very specific to that morning, so that when we went into watch, we knew exactly what we were looking for, and I found that really interesting and helpful.
It really reinforced to me the importance of a learning goal, how important it is to have that learning goal, and that it needs to be transparent, and the kids seem to have so much more success if the learning goal is really transparent. So that became very clear on the sessions that I observed as well.
Mm-hmm. And if I could add something to that, absolutely, I agree with you about making that learning goal quite clear. But one of the other things that we had an opportunity to do during the co-planning session was to use resources like the Big Ideas book by Marion Small, and being able to have a very rich discussion about what the big idea is that we were working towards helped us to refine that learning goal in such a way that it opened up the problem that was going to be solved in the lesson and gave us a better opportunity for differentiation and entry points for students that are at different levels.
Thank you for those comments. Just before we leave the whole topic of collaborative inquiry, we'll spread that question a little bit and to ask, how do you think this kind of collaborative work, whether it's in this particular framework or any version of collaboration generally, how do you think that it has affected the way you think about instruction and teaching generally?
Well, for me personally, Val and I get to work together next year as grade 6 teachers, and I'm really looking forward to, after watching how we refined the learning and goal and the lesson itself, I'm really looking forward to kind of following that model with you next year, because we're going to be grade 6 core teachers together. And just, I think we'll do a lot of co-planning for our lessons and tweaking the goals and working as a big group in the library. So I think watching that model unfold really got me excited for next year.
I think that just what you said, watching how that unfolded and seeing for my role when I'm looking at how I can support the teachers, how I can support the school in the different needs and where you are and things, it really helped me see what the needs were and where I could go and how I could support. So that was a really nice thing for me, as well as to really clarify the difference between the planning and activity and really planning through the learning goal. And that was really nice to see, and we'll be able to move that forward. That was good.
That takes a long time.
It takes a surprising amount of time. When you think, oh, I know exactly what we're going to do, and you realize you have an activity in mind, and then you start working through what the learning goal is and where they are and where they're going, that takes a longer time than we expected, hence the shortened planning.
Okay, any other thoughts on that one?
Just to follow up on Leslie, often one of the things that I found about this process is often we know what activity we want to do with the students, and often as teachers we jump to that right away because I know what I want to do and let's get on with it. But pausing and thinking through the learning goal in taking that time, although we don't often have that luxury, and I can't see us on a regular basis having that luxury, but it is. It was very, very valuable because it brought out other things that you kind of were able to put that lesson into the big picture and to see how it all fits together. So I really liked that we did pause there.
Right. So the next question is looking at what kids are actually getting out of this. And while student learning or anyone's learning is a really complex idea, I would like for us to think for a moment about whether or not you thought that students are learning any better as a result of this work. Of course, the fine answer is, of course they are, but none of us is naive around the table to think that we would know that right away. But do you really think that this, and because you've been doing so much observation of students as your colleagues are teaching, do you think they're learning better as a result of some of the practices that we put in place?
I think it made a real difference when the teachers that were doing the lesson made sure that each student in the group had a role to play, because certain lessons I observed, a couple kids kind of took charge and took over the lesson, and so the other kids were fine to just sit back and think, okay, they can do all the work. And then through our discussion and our debriefing, we brought that up. And then the lessons after that, the teachers made sure that each student had to play a certain role, so they had to be actively engaged. And then when that happened, I saw a lot of learning going on. So I think that's really important in group work, that each student is held responsible in some kind of way.
I also think that when we planned, and I'm thinking of the last session that we had, when we planned an activity where we were basing it, a lot of what they were doing was what they could do independently. That they didn't need to be taught in the group, that they could do independently and then explore the math that we were talking about right at that next point and next step for them. So they were all engaged and very enthusiastic and very involved with what the activity was, and then we just moved it. We were helping them see the math come alive in front of their eyes, which I thought was really powerful. It was good for me. I enjoyed it.
Yes, when you hear those shrieks of, oh, that certainly good evidence that something's happening. Do you think there was anything particular that made a difference for certain students, be it the things that we did in the planning stages, or the materials that you used, or the fact that they were working in groups, and all of, if you could parse out all those little different things, and I know that they all work together. Try to think of a particular student that you were watching, or if you were doing the teaching, that you think some element made the difference for. We're always looking for, is there really one thing that worked?
I think the way the lessons were designed was that there was different entry points for the students. So some of the students that were less confident still could jump on board. And then as the problem unfolded, they might not be able to reach it right to the very end, but there was a place that they could come on board. The lessons were all planned in a way that it was multifaceted. So I thought that was good.
One of the things, though, adding to what you just said, was, with more entry points in the lesson or problem-solving activity, you're hoping that you're going to have more student engagement. And I certainly noticed that when we had, the teachers observing in the classroom, students kind of, are ready for their for the lesson and seem to be cooperating better. The true test, though, is when you do it without this formal group there observing. And so I hosted a class on the first time around, and I did the same lesson the day after with the other class, just by myself. And I was quite pleased to see that the student engagement was significantly, well, I don't know if it was significantly, but it was noticeably much better. And that usually gives me feedback whether or not, the lesson was planned out well and carried out well.
So it wasn't everybody in the class, it wasn't all the adults in the class, it was really the way you'd set it up.
Well, I think all the work that we put into it, clarifying what the learning goals were, looking at those big ideas, all those, are going to come together, and as the lesson plays out, you're going to see what the results were. And, so one of the things that I look for is, were all the students engaged in the lesson? Were they actually doing, were there lighting little math fires going on throughout the lesson? And so I noticed that.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I thought it was great. One thing I noticed about all the lessons we had was that there was some aspect of, the students collaborating, doing group work. So through that, there was a lot of accountable talk between the students. So, they were really learning from one another, and really having to think about, whether they understand what they're doing. Even some of the questioning we were doing as teachers while walking around the classroom, I think really got at that deeper understanding rather than just, all right, here's how you solve the problem, do it.
Right. Yeah, good. Thank you. So, you folks have been this year receiving sort of the gold standard of in-service related to collaborative inquiry, because it was heavily supported by Leslie and our math resource teacher as well. And not all schools would have been involved to the same extent. So if you had an opportunity to provide some advice to colleagues of your own who might be involved in projects similar to this at this degree of intensity, what kind of advice might you give them?
Well, for me, the one thing, and I think Wendy already mentioned this a little bit, but that focus on the big ideas, the learning goals, realizing that you might have this idea for a lesson, you might have these certain expectations you're trying to meet, but in the end, it's constantly going back and refocusing on that. And we certainly spend a lot of time on that. Like you mentioned, it's kind of got in the way of actually getting to the lesson sometimes. But I think that was one of the really important things. And I think if we actively decided to, every couple minutes, refocus on that, we might have been able to get through that process of constantly refocusing the learning goal a bit more efficiently, maybe.
Yeah, and I think it reinforces in our lessons that even when it's not group work, that even when it's just individual seat work, that we just have to keep going back to that learning goal as well. So it just kind of reinforced how important that is, just in no matter what type of grouping you're using in any particular day for a lesson.
I know that I wasn't one of the teachers, so I can't give the advice that you would give to a teacher who was doing it, but I was very impressed with how willing the teachers were to open their classroom and open their practice, just to have people in there watching them work, watching them interact with the students, and a lot of adults in the room when they were working. And that willingness to just jump in and do it was really significant for me. And I would hope that you would maybe mention to some of your colleagues that, hey, it was okay it was okay.
I think we need to, sort of reinforce that. Just keep an open mind about it. Some of us that have been teaching a certain way are reluctant to change our teaching practices, and definitely, this inquiry model that we used for co-planning is different than some of us are used to. But I think I got something out of it. Probably Gintis,
Definitely.
you may not have gotten the same thing that I did out of it, but I'm sure you grew professionally in terms of your practices. So just being open-minded and
Right. Thank you for that. Go ahead.
I think the most important thing about co-teaching and co-planning is that it's really about the students. It's not about teaching style or how well you teach. I don't think my advice to other teachers would be, it's not about evaluating each other. Like, that's really, we're not supposed to, but it's not what it's about. It's not how it played out. It played out that our focus was on the students and what the students are learning. And we all had that same desire to see the students learn when we were in the class, and that's what we were watching for. That's what we were looking for. We weren't we weren't there to evaluate other teachers, but we actually were not evaluating teachers either.
There was no time.
There was no time, and it just was. It's sort of a non-issue. It's to the side.
Well, that's a good reminder.
Yeah.
Thanks. So what about, this is a point when I'm really interested in this feedback, because there seems to be the formula that we used, and sorry to call it formulaic, especially if we're talking about being very responsive, but you have to start somewhere. So we met about once a month, and we would take an entire day, and we did that 4 times over the course of the year. Somebody made that up. I'm not sure who, but do you think that even in terms of those logistics, is that useful? Should we be meeting more often? Do we all need to meet together? Those kind of nitty-gritty details are really important, because you're the only ones who have that information. Did it seem to spring up too quickly, or did you, would you want it more condensed? All that kind of stuff. If we could kind of flesh that one out a bit, that's really good information, because there are a lot of collaborative inquiries that use about the same time frame as the one that we did, but we haven't been asking for feedback on that. So what were your thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought about it, not so much on the time frame, but I wouldn't have minded having a chance to revisit some of the classes. Like some of the lessons we weren't able to get to the consolidation phase. Right. Some of them we discussed how this is something exactly right, and it's something that it's ongoing. And it would be nice to have a chance to come back to a class or a lesson that we sort of had done before and revisit it. See what worked, see what didn't work, because we see the immediate results, the observations in that class, but we don't see what happens the following lesson, or again a month later, whether it's still with them.
Right, because we were doing 2 grades and all that kind of thing. Yeah,
that makes a difference.
Any other thoughts on that one?
I'd like to see us have an opportunity to perhaps do some pre-planning or pre-preparation that we can do individually, whether we're communicating or collaborating by email, but at least by the time we do meet in the morning, we're sort of all on the same page in terms of the area of the curriculum that we're going to be looking at, and we've all had an opportunity to review what the big ideas are for that, and at least we're kind of on the same mindset when we're sitting down at the table, as opposed to having to hash that out and spending a bit of time doing that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that one?
I think that there's a need to be flexible, and the flexibility I'm thinking about is in terms of the learning curve for the teachers who are co-planning and co-teaching. That for this group, it seemed that beginning part was it took a lot of time, and it was required time. It was good time, and it was very valuable. It would be nice to then have another session or 2 where the teaching would happen away from this group, but this group would come together for consolidation and debriefing and really work on the different styles and ways that we do that consolidation of learning at the end. And that would be a nice way to spend another day, just to follow up on that. I'm following up on what you said, but it would be nice if we're close together. So instead, for example, you would teach the lesson. We might have known what it was planning through email, but then the following day, we would all get together, we would look at the student work that you had, plan out the debrief, and then go into the classroom, do that debrief, come back and plan again, so that we could see how it went. And I think that dividing the whole piece into 2 learning sessions for us would be a valuable next step. So flexibility, and depending on where people are, would be helpful.
And it's always that tension between, if it's already ready, then when is the opportunity to have the conversation? Because even the one we were on last time, it took us nearly an hour to finally, oops, that wasn't the learning goal we started with, and we've now gotten off that track. And so it's always, do you come well prepared? And if so, what does prepared mean? I think the best thing for preparedness is not exactly sure what this is going to entail, but we need to get some input from other people, which is, it's not often what we think of preparedness being. We think of preparedness being something along the lines of, are the materials already? Are we clear in our mind exactly what we are going to do, as opposed to, are we clear in our mind what we want the kids to actually do? Which is that it's all related to that growth mindset and not being, or being comfortable with the ambiguity of it all. So, moving on to math, and so it really was all about math. We wouldn't want our viewers to think that this we sat around for the day after day just talking about structure. It was all about math, and there were some specific components of that. The 3-part lesson loomed large. The notion of big ideas and rich problems, and kids working in groups. So, in terms of their learning mathematics, what are your thoughts on the content of what we were exploring for the last few months?
Well, going back to what we were talking about before about taking those expectations, learning goals, and bringing it back to a big idea, I thought was really useful, because I think a lot of students kind of have a hard time wrapping around their mind about why are we doing this. You're just sort of going through these steps, trying to solve these problems, not really knowing what the big application is.
Yeah.
So I think really focusing on that and constantly spending that time to refocus on that, it was just really great for getting the students knowing this is what it's for. This is the one thing you need to take from this lesson, basically.
I found when the big idea was really clear in the lesson, there was a lot of little lessons that came out just kind of gradually as a result of the big idea being really clear. When I was watching both of your lessons, I noticed a lot of other learning going on that was a result of your big idea and your learning goal being really clear. So that was neat to see. There was a lot of ripple effect.
And who was doing the teaching of those little lessons?
The kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on finding the problems to start with? Because that in my work with some other schools, sometimes that's a bit of a hiccup point. Is, well, where are these fine problems that are supposed to clarify mathematical learning for kids?
Well, I think just being able to have the discussion in the co-planning and also with the debrief gave us an opportunity to create more purposeful questions, probing questions with the students to help them, if they're a little bit off track, to give them something to think about to get them moving so that they can get over maybe that little bit of a hump.
I think that the books that we had as the resources that were purchased gave us a good start, because the activities that are suggested in there are directly related to the big ideas. So we were able to see immediately some examples that would be appropriate for launching into that big idea, and that way we were able to keep the math on track. And the questioning piece was to me was really interesting, because there's been a lot of work on the effective questioning, and there's a monograph on it, and there's things to do, and until you realize that you have that very specific goal and you have to prompt the question and you're crafting it in your head, you realize how difficult that can be, and how it's interesting that we struggled with that, I think, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was good.
Okay. Anything else about the math? It's okay if not.
I like the fact that we used so many different manipulatives in the lessons, and you could really see how the kids respond to being able to get their hands on something and work it out in front of their eyes, and those concrete manipulatives really were valuable.
Yeah, very good. Okay, we're nearing the end, and I sent you that little critical thinking protocol ahead of time, and we'll just go. We don't have to go in order, but as long as everybody gets a voice in this, and it's called "I used to think, now I think," about just trying to think about your belief in math instruction 6 months ago versus today. So. And it's often easy to start with, I used to think, fill in the blank, and now I think, fill in the blank. So if anyone would like to we can take a couple of seconds to think about that, and then just have your final say.
I used to think that with group work in math, perhaps you wouldn't get as much accomplished in a lesson because the kids are spending so much time talking. But now I realize that if they have a chance to talk through the problem, that they really will come to, like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, so many other learning initiatives that they might not have gotten if they just did it from pencil to paper from a book. So I've kind of changed my attitude towards that.
I used to think more is better, and I've come to realize that oftentimes less will create more thinking and more opportunities for learning. And so as we were able to look at the big ideas and sort of open up what that learning goal was and try not to make it so specific, but more based on that big idea, sort of help the students go at their own pace during that lesson. Like you were saying, there's a lot of little bits of learning happening, and many of them gain some insight in an area that maybe they didn't quite have before, and that helped get that piece of the puzzle that they needed.
For me, I found that I used to think, I guess the curriculum expectations are the be-all and end-all of planning a lesson, sort of thinking, okay, here's what I need to address. Report cards are coming up. I need to be able to comment on these specifically.
Right. Get on with it.
Exactly. And I guess for me, the big realization through this process was that, well, first of all, there's these, the big ideas, which were what we were trying to achieve the whole time. But I think those are a lot more accessible to the students. It makes me realize what these expectations are for, basically, because, they're going to lead up to that big idea. So by addressing the big idea, the expectations get covered anyway, but you see the big picture, basically.
I'm not a math teacher, so I don't have a lot of I used to thinks because I haven't taught math in a very long time. But coming at it from a language standpoint, I used to think there wasn't a lot of language in math, and through our process here, I saw an awful lot of language being used. I saw an awful lot of opportunities for kids to develop vocabulary and to develop their oral language in communicating, working through problems with each other. So I saw a lot more crossover than I expected between math and literacy.
Also, we're working towards that triangulation of evidence, with observations and conversations, and not just the product. And using that 3-part lesson plan platform and making the learning goal very, very visible. As Gintis, you were saying that you observed a lot more accountable talk happening, which just gives us greater opportunities for assessing a student's understanding, because sometimes it's hard to eke it out on a paper and pencil test, but in a conversation or just observing students talking, you get a feel for where a student is at.
Great. This brings us to the end of our conversation, and I just want to thank Gintis and Leslie and Val and Wendy and Gino for your participation in this. Just hearing what you've said today, I think this will be very valuable for your colleagues here at this school. I know Jim will be very interested in hearing what you learned, but more importantly, that it puts you in a different place. We hope you just admitted it. It puts you in a different place than you'd been in terms of your own understanding of the work that you do than previously, and that's what really professional development is for and what it's all about. So thanks again. I know you have very busy days ahead of you, so I think we'll call it a wrap. Thanks.